Welcome to Doing the Work, a Naples integrated recovery podcast. My name is Brian, and this space is for anyone who's tired of surviving the same emotional and behavioral loops, whether that's anxiety, trauma, addiction, or problems in your relationships. Around here, we cut the surface level advice, no sugarcoating, no platitudes, no bumper sticker wisdom. We focus on clarity, responsibility, emotional discipline, and the courage to look at yourself honestly so that you can stop repeating the same old patterns and start living with intention instead of reaction. Let's get into it. Hi, everybody. Today, I wanted to talk about owning your patterns, and I'm going to talk about a lesser known framework, but I'm going to illustrate this with some examples. And something I love about being self-employed is I rarely have dread when I check my email, but I can think of times that I have worked, in bureaucratic organizations like DCF or police departments, community mental health, or group practices where some emails and the language in them would make me suiting up my armor, getting prepared to go to war. Have you ever seen a name in an inbox and then your gut twisted because you were like, I know that she is not checking or messaging me to tell me what a good job I'm doing. Every time this person emails me, it's something bad. Or it could be outside of work. It could be your ex-husband or your ex-girlfriend, whoever. But in this example, I can think about working in a private practice, a group practice, and the administration would send out several practice-wide emails. And I can't even remember the wording or what was going on in some of these because that's how unimportant it is a year later. But I recall in this moment, getting the email or replying to the email, this was the number one priority, the number one most important thing in the world. And probably it was something stupid about payroll, make sure that you send in your timesheet by whatever date, or some clarification about a documentation, all that corporate BS that I'm sure that you probably read. And one day I read one and I heard tone. And once I hear tone, I'm not just reading a policy reminder, I'm filling in the cracks with a narrative that I have been disrespected, or I'm reading that I'm being controlled, or I'm reading that someone is talking down to me or keeping score. Now, this did not originate in a vacuum. So today I'm going to talk about a lesser known therapy framework, or a lesser discussed therapy framework, that will illustrate all of this, give you a little bit of context, and also what doing the work looks like. So I get an email. I think that the one in this situation was related to payroll, and the CEO or the owner of this group practice happened to be working in the building that I was in that day, and I had a break, and poor guy caught my wrath, which wasn't, not like Milton from Office Space, where he says, I'm going to burn the building down. But that was kind of the reaction that was going on inside me, receiving an email when I was like, I didn't even do this. What am I getting yelled at for with this? And the reaction is quick. It's immediate. There's no rational thought process going on while you are reacting. So these reactive parts of me are going, that didn't land well. I'm done. I'm fucking out of here. I don't need this job. I'm not even a W-2 employee. You don't pay my insurance. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. I'm not going to be talked down to like this. So that's the part that I needed to pay attention to, because there was the email and then there was the story that I was attaching to it. So I walked over to the owner's office, and I was already responding to the story where I had assigned motive and intent and hierarchy and disrespect and was building a case. But I went in asking for clarification and kind of letting him know I'm pissed. I didn't like the way that this sounded. Thankfully, this guy was a therapist and he could tolerate feedback without turning the conversation into a defensive mess. But we talked about the email and what I thought was tone. He clarified what the intention was, and it ended up being very reasonable. Nothing that there was like a need for an explosion or a dramatic exit or going to war. And the other thing, he's like, this doesn't even apply for you. Like, I mean, you're not even doing it. So like, it's not even for you. Now, when I worked in law enforcement, I think that there is nothing worse than sending out a company-wide or agency-wide email or creating a new policy just because one guy screwed up. In my opinion, if you have a employee who's screwing up, pull them into your office. You don't shame them in public. Pull them into your office and say, this is what you need to correct. You don't tell everybody. Anyway, I talked over this email with the owner and he clarified the intent. It actually ended up being quite reasonable. And once the conversation was over, I had to look at the size of my internal reaction. Now, I didn't walk in and say, I'm quitting. There was none of that, but I was pissed, and I'm sure that he could tell that I was pissed. And the email probably did have some tone. Maybe I added it. Either way, the intensity of my response had gone past the facts that I actually had. And in the moment, it felt justified because my mind had built a case. Someone's talking down to me. They're controlling me. They're treating me like an employee when I am not one. And that's the part that a lot of people skip. Some of them may spend too much time in the mental courtroom trying to dissect if somebody was rude or dismissive or passive-aggressive or unfair or whatever. Sometimes that is the case, and sometimes an email does have a tone. Sometimes the policy is stupid. Sometimes the boss really is incompetent. Sometimes somebody is being condescending, but that didn't explain why the first reaction went from minor annoyance to Milton and the I'm going to burn the whole thing down. And that's where I had to notice something that I didn't really love about myself. There had been plenty of other emails that I would get where someone would ask a question that was probably pretty reasonable or telling me, hey, this practice, we don't use adjustment disorder because it leads to too many insurance denials or whatever. And so I notice I'm pretty quick to reply. Thankfully, though, I do not hit the send button. I've learned to really just kind of sit with stuff for a little bit, usually because the first draft comes out a lot sharper than I want it to. Maybe accurate, maybe defensible, maybe also with a little bit of edge that I wanted to let that person feel. So I developed a routine, write the email, walk away from it, come back, after the next session or whatever, and then I'd evaluate whether the tone was actually appropriate. Or sometimes maybe I'll send it to somebody else first and ask, does this have a lot of tone to it? Because usually the first version sounded like I was gearing up for a fight. Now, in some past episodes, I've used parts language or internal family systems. There could be some revenge parts or equalizer parts, but certainly I have got some parts that show up if something feels unfair and immediately are prepared to balance the score. And it can have a very strong sense of justice, but a poor sense of proportion. And this reaction shows up frequently for me if I perceive criticism control or someone keeping track of me in a way that feels like bean counting. And this is where the pattern is harder to ignore because it has shown up in many different situations. Same basic flavor. Somebody questions a decision, I feel an accusation. Someone asks for clarification, I feel like I'm being audited. Someone sends a policy reminder, I feel like I am being controlled. Different room, different people, different facts, same internal reaction. And so that's what this episode is really about. Why this reaction before I don't even have any of the information. And a therapy framework that explains this is called schema therapy. A schema is a survival template. It's a rule that your mind has built from experience based on something that happened before. This is probably happening again right now. And that rule makes sense probably when it was formed. It may have helped you read a room faster. It could have helped you survive criticism or control or shame or consequences. But the problem is when that old template keeps getting reapplied automatically to situations that only resemble the original threat. Then you are responding to what happened and what it reminds you of. And so that is the whole concept. A schema is a survival template. The work is noticing when the template showed up before your conscious thought did. And so if I look back at my life, I can see why this template got built. One part came from growing up with a father who was a scientist. He was very intelligent, he was highly analytical, and very critical. And that combination is tricky because criticism can hide inside of competence. It can sound reasonable, and it can sound like someone is trying to help you be better. Sometimes they are, but if that's the atmosphere that you live in and you grew up in, then feedback starts to carry a different meaning, where maybe nothing is ever really right. There's no such thing as a perfect score, only things that can be improved. And if something is wrong, it's definitely getting pointed out. Over time, a kid learns rules from this, and a question can become a correction can become exposure, and then feedback starts to feel less like information and more like proof that you are missing something again. And so if that becomes part of your template, that's one facet of a developing problem. When someone asks why something was handled a certain way, an adult part knows that this is a normal question, and another younger part hears, "You fucked it up again. Explain yourself." And now add in another layer. I grew up gay in a conservative Christian environment. When you're a kid in that kind of setting, when this is already a vulnerable time for most kids who are developing, but identity itself becomes something that people are evaluating. And if you learn that there are parts of you that might not be accepted, shame enters the emotional landscape very quickly. And before adulthood begins, your nervous system has already learned a few very ugly lessons about the world. Maybe that like criticism is exposure, being seen clearly means rejection, and expressing yourself means consequences. Now, I'm going to add in another layer because people are complex, right? Another layer, 12 years in law enforcement. It reinforced the same pattern from a different direction. Law enforcement is paramilitary. It has a hierarchy. Orders move down. You follow direction. You confirm that you understand. You choose your words very carefully because the structure is real and there are major consequences to you opening your mouth in the wrong place. And so if a lieutenant tells you something, the expectation is very simple. You follow the order. You confirm that you understand. Even if it is ass backwards and it doesn't make any sense, you nod, you say, "Yes, sir, that's understood," and you do not push back at all. And I worked for, a real prick lieutenant that when I was a sergeant overseeing a group of guys on the midnight shift, if my guys would make mistakes, I was the first to know about it because apparently he didn't have anything better to do than like review traffic stop footage or something. I don't even know. But I was constantly in this lieutenant's office, and the way that he would talk down to me, it was like I was lower than a dog. And so I would just kind of say like, I got it, sir. I'll make sure that I address it. I'll make sure I take care of it. But then there was like an additional layer of ego on top of this of, oh no, I don't think you do fucking got it. So he would like be a close talker in my face. Like, do you hear me? Are you getting it? Are you getting it? And, so think living and working in an environment like that for years, this also shapes people. Now, one shaping experience that I think still carries some charge for me. It's getting better now that this chief of police has been removed from command. But I think back to, there was a time when I was demoted from my supervisory position. And in this demotion meeting, which was very short, the chief of police attempted to like bait me into an argument to try to make me have a reaction. She actually did get a little bit of one, which was not good. That's part of the story. But when I was being demoted, part of it was that they said that I had difficulty enforcing policies as a supervisor. And they used an example of a recent policy that had come out that was totally unreasonable. Marco Island is like a thumbnail. It's such a tiny little town, and it has 4 patrol districts, and there was a very rigid policy that had come out that police officers could not leave their patrol district at all. Now we're talking about something that's like, it's just a few blocks. So they are driving in the same circles, going up and down the same neighborhood streets for 12 hours. And if they wanted to leave their zone to go to 7-Eleven to get a soda, or maybe stop at home to have dinner with their wife, they had to ask the sergeant for permission to leave their zone. This is insanity, that they have been entrusted with the legal authority to shoot and kill somebody if need be, to neutralize a threat or to make an arrest, need permission to cross the side of the street. Okay? Insane micromanaging. But it's my job to enforce that as a supervisor, as insane as that is. So I made a mistake of calling the officers that I was supervising a few days before this had come out and giving them a heads up. This is what's coming down the pipe. I know that it is not pleasant. I know that you are a retired, police commander from New Jersey, that you have 30 years of experience. You have every reason to be upset about it. But it is what it is, and this is what is going to be the rule going in on Monday. Anyway, as I was being demoted, they were like, you didn't need to call people and tell them your thoughts on a policy. And I made a mistake in this while emotionally reactive that I went back to. I had discussed this policy with the lieutenant in his office before this, and I said, this doesn't make sense. This is crazy that we're enforcing this. And he says, yeah, I know, it's bullshit, but it is what it is. And so I made the mistake in this demotion that I said, sir, you yourself said that policy is bullshit. Now he immediately started backtracking and ass kissing to the chief, oh no, I love all the policies that she comes out with, or whatever. And what made it in my personnel file, you can find this on Google if you search for me, is the chief of police wrote, you were relieved of command from being a supervisor. Your response was, I don't follow the bullshit directives. Now, go ahead and play this back, because that's not what I said, but that's what made it in my personnel file. I spoke to a union rep about this, and, well, I guess the mistake there is that he too was another little corporate kiss-assy, up the ladder, trying to get a little piece of cheese. He immediately went to the chief to tell the chief, because I said, hey man, this damaging thing just went in my personnel file and that's not even how it happened. And he went straight to the chief. Guess what happened next? I had a meeting. So I had asked to meet with the chief, who was not able to meet with me, of course, because she was like taking pictures with people or, doing chiefy stuff. And this union rep brought it to her attention. Next thing I know, I was called in for a meeting with her and the entire command staff. Now I've got captains and lieutenants and sergeants all there, and me in the penalty box, where the chief at the head of the table says, Officer Graneman, you have accused the chief of police of lying and falsifying a document. And none of that is what happened, but I was so fearful with no representation, nobody in my corner. I start backtracking like, I can't remember. Oh, so now you don't remember. This is probably one of the darkest and like lowest points of my life to be placed in all of this. This is all like part of my termination story. So with my departure from law enforcement, there's not only the demotion, but then also that I accused the chief of falsifying documents, all this crazy stuff that went into it shortly before she terminated me or asked me to resign. The point of me telling you all of this is because I want to paint the picture for why does this reaction come? And this is exactly why, is because experiences like this teach and train a nervous system something very quickly. Speaking up can backfire. Context does not matter. What you said will actually be rewritten. All you need is just one bad person in control and a couple of cronies who will do what that person wants. And with that, you adapt, you swallow the reaction, you take it. And in schema therapy language, an environment like this is called subjugation schema, a pattern where your nervous system learns that the safest thing that you can do is suppress your voice to avoid consequences. And if you carry that pattern long enough, then the coping response can eventually flip in the opposite direction, and that is called overcompensation. But as I'm sitting in this room with the command staff and I have become the enemy of the state. Now, like a couple of years before this, I was Employee of the Year, no discipline in my file, and then overnight I have become the pariah and the cancer of the agency. This was a conversation that had nothing to do with policy. It had everything to do with power. It had become about whether I was allowed to name what was actually happening. It had become about what the system would do if I pushed back on how the story was being written. And that kind of experience teaches people a very specific lesson, that what actually happened can be rewritten. And speaking up is insubordination. You can be trying to clarify reality, and the system turns the clarification into another charge against you. So you learn to just take it. Yes, sir, it's understood. No, I'm in the wrong. Maybe I didn't remember it correctly. And years later, if you get a slightly irritating email about documentation procedures, part of you reacts as if that whole command staff just walked in the room and you're on trial again. That's the pattern. So I mentioned this is called subjugation schema, where you learn to just suppress your voice to avoid consequences. You swallow what you really think, you defer, you comply, keep the peace, you just try to survive. And if you do that long enough, a coping response can flip in the other direction, where instead of suppressing your reaction, the system aggressively defends autonomy. And now anything that smells like control gets the reaction of how I wished I had stood up for myself that day. And any reminder that I get in an email feels like someone's dominating me, or feedback feels like I'm being pulled back into place to get beat over the head again by this chief of police and her command staff. And so that doesn't mean that an email didn't have a tone to it. Sometimes people are condescending. Sometimes a chicken shit boss might use policy as the way that they dress up their insecurity. This work gets difficult because the trigger could contain a real signal, and the signal can be real, and the response can still be carrying old material. But if a pattern keeps reappearing across different situations, then maybe you need to look at that. This made me think also that when I was in early recovery, probably around 90 days sober, I had a sponsor that I was working with who would ask me sometimes, like, why do you get so defensive? Or sometimes it would come out a little bit differently. Why are you so sensitive? Now, at 90 days sober, I didn't have language for any of this. I hadn't studied trauma. I didn't have a master's degree, didn't know what schema therapy is, didn't really understand why criticism hit that button so hard. All I knew is that if I felt criticized, something inside me came online faster than any rational part of my brain, and I was preparing a defense before I even knew what was going on internally. Now, years later, after a lot of therapy work and clinical training, a point came that I actually was still working with that sponsor, and I had talked about the critical environment that I grew up in, shame around my identity, and years spent in a rigid authority structure where pushing back meant consequences. And the response that I got back was kind of a shrug, like from the 12-step perspective that he lived by. The solution was just go to more meetings, do more service. That sounds like ego, or it sounds like you create a lot of your own problems. And I mean, I'm not criticizing that service and meetings are helpful and living by spiritual principles is helpful. I'm alive because recovery gave me something when I needed it. But the problem is when complex reactions shaped by years of experience are flattened into a personality flaw, like, why are you so defensive or sensitive? Or, maybe that's your ego. Maybe there's some truth in that, but a person can need humility and still have a pattern worth understanding. A person can need accountability and have history, and a person can be responsible for their behavior without pretending that the behavior formed out of nowhere. And that's the part that I care about as a therapist, because if we just call everything a character defect, then we train compliance without insight. You learn to shut up or apologize faster or use some recovery-approved language, slap page 417, acceptance is the answer on everything, and then underneath, you're not really understanding the machinery. So, the reaction keeps coming back under a different name. Now it's resentment. Now it's contempt. Now it's I'm setting boundaries. Now it's I'm done with toxic people. Now it's I'm protecting my peace. Sometimes this language is legitimate, but other times it is an outfit for the same old pattern. And that is why owning the pattern has to mean something more precise than self-blame. Owning a pattern can look like, ooh, that email had a tone and I didn't really like that. But I also recognize that I just added my whole history to it. Or maybe that person kind of talked down to me, but I escalated it before I had more facts. Or maybe a policy is silly, but then my reaction is also adding on Marco Island PD's nonsense of you can't leave this district, and also you like it. You don't have an opinion on it. You will obey it. You will, yes, sir. And also, if I even hear that you had an opinion about it, there's going to be a consequence for that too. So that's the reason that if I get an email, all of that gets activated. But the adult move is not pretending that the trigger isn't there. It's asking which trigger got activated and what's the story that I'm attaching to this? What am I assuming would happen? What did I feel compelled to do next? All of those things expose the old template. And so if my first impulse is to defend myself like I am on trial, then there's probably an old courtroom somewhere in the background. If my first impulse is quit, burn the building down, punish, retaliate, 5-paragraph legal brief because I got an email telling me to turn my timesheet in on a certain day, even if I wasn't the one that did it, something got activated beyond the facts of the email. That does not make me bad. It makes the pattern visible, and visible patterns can be worked with. Hidden patterns that you don't have awareness of run the show. That's the whole point of this episode. It is not to make you perfectly regulated person that has just monk-like serenity. That is fake. It's bullshit. If you get a nasty email, it's okay to be irritated. Some people do communicate poorly. Some systems are ridiculous. Some authority figures should be questioned and removed, and she was. The goal is to stop confusing activation with accuracy. Just because a reaction is strong doesn't mean that the interpretation you're having about it is complete. And just because I am feeling ready to fight doesn't mean that a fight is required. Just because something resembles an old threat doesn't mean that the current situation deserves the full historical response. So that's where owning the pattern means something. It means that I stop acting like every reaction is fully explained by the other person. It means I stop outsourcing my internal state to whoever sent an email, asked a question, gave me feedback, or used the wrong tone. It means hold people accountable while taking responsibility for the size of my own response. That is a harder standard because it takes away the cheap escape hatch. Once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. You'll still have that first reaction. I get that email and I'm like, oh shit, here we go. This person's trying to control me. But now there's another step that's available. Read it again. Check the story. What did you add? Then decide. That is where freedom shows up. Annoying freedom. The kind where you don't get to indulge in all of your old bullshit patterns just because it felt righteous in the moment. It's the kind where growth looks less like a breakthrough and more like catching the pattern 5 minutes earlier than you used to a couple years ago. So you send a clearer email, you ask clarifying questions, you walk into the boss's office to have a conversation with some curiosity instead of being fully prepared to make your closing argument. You stop turning every tone issue into a referendum on your autonomy, and you stop letting old authority figures write today's response. That is owning the pattern. That's schema therapy. The situation might be current. That reaction, it's something older. And once you can see it clearly, now you have a choice that you didn't have before, and that is doing the work. Thanks for spending the time with me. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with somebody who may need to hear it. Be kind to yourself, be kind to people around you. Remember that we're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we currently have, and we're all capable of growing past that. If you'd like to reach out or connect, send me an email, brian@naplesintegratedrecovery.com. I hope to hear from you there. In the meantime, thanks again for listening. I'll see you on the next one.